Some said it would be an easy victory. Some said they could return home soon. And some said they had nothing to fear. The clones had set foot on Umbara. The first wave had landed, and Commander Bly, who previously was stationed briefly on Kashyyyk, had set up a defensive perimeter near an enemy outpost. Their current setup was primitive, protected by a wall of armor and clones. Bly closely stayed informed on the situation through his main comms channel. The initial assault was broken. The upmost right flank were stuck and found themselves holding out as enemy infantry and armor rolled in closer. The issue was that the division on their left was soon to be wiped out. A frightened clone trooper screamed and begged over the comms to send help. He did not dare move. The enemy was getting closer and closer. They were searching the field for survivors amongst the lying dead. It would only be a matter of seconds before they would find him. Bly knew nothing could be done in time, and the last words uttered by the soldier were cut off by blaster fire. Bly found his army at a stalemate. Intel informed him that the central troops could not hold out long if they were attacked from the rear as well. The Umbarans had cut off the clones' right flanking forces, and they were sitting ducks as the enemy could surround both them and the central troops. Bly reached out to Captain Rex. He ordered him to rally his troops and link up with the clones on the right. An uplink with the main central forces needed to be re-established at all costs. Rex was on it. He gathered some of his higher-ranking troops and gave them the details. He informed them of the fallen division and the clones stuck on the right side of the battlefield. This would not be a battle to defeat the enemy, but to help out their brothers who were stuck in a desperate situation. Nevertheless, one of the clones made the remark that in order to reach them, they would have to cross the field where the fallen division had fought and lost. Rex confirmed this, and assured the soldiers with the thought of the ability to pick up some of the enemies there as revenge for those who died. With a loud and brave salute, all troops acknowledged, and the 501st went out into the woods. Everywhere they went there was danger lurking in the background, with blaster fire and rockets going in all directions. But the 501st destination had been set, and they had it in for the kill. There was chaos everywhere. Troops and squads were scattered. The vehicles had the most difficult time traversing the thick and vile vegetation. The Umbarans did not have nearly the same issues, as this was their home, their turf, and they knew well how to maneuver it. The power of the clones' weaponry did leave its mark though, as it mowed through entire groups of Umbarans. The commander needed to think on what to do next. His right flank was in pieces, but help was on the way. It would not be enough to push forward, it was only there to relieve them. He could push with the left, but a similar result would be disastrous in case Rex would not be able to link up in time with the right side. Bly had already sent most of his forces deployed during the first wave towards the center, as he figured the defenses would be strongest there. They were able to hold, but not for long. In some areas at the front, the clones had achieved complete victories, scattering the Umbarans all over the place, some desperately hiding amongst the plants and trees. But these victories were short-lived, as the Umbaran outposts continued to send in more troops to reinforce their front. They had a large amount of men, vehicles, and supplies stored at the camp, and it was surrounded by an impenetrable force field. Nearby AA stations made it impossible to destroy the outpost. Moreover, the site would be a valuable setup to use for the clones in the battles to come. An advancing convoy of ATTEs on its way to bombard the shield in hopes to overload it got hit by mines. Without that field down, the Central Army would not be able to proceed. But a small squad of clones might be able to infiltrate the nearby facility and overload the force field from the inside. But that would be dangerous, with very little chance of succession. Bly would need to find clones crazy and brave enough to take on that challenge. He turned his head to Bakara and said, "Get me Delta." The front line at the center was wide and were divided by small groups of Umbarans who managed to push through in an attempt to cut off the main force, but instead found themselves cut off from their reinforcements. Stranded vehicles were used as cover by the clones as they tried to fight back. Communications were scrambled. The clones had no idea what the situation was, if they were winning or not. Some of them realized that if they were surrounded, there was no way of telling. All they could do was stand their ground and pick off the enemy targets one at a time. They were soldiers. They had trained for this moment all their life. The enemy would send in more and more troops each time, but they were ready to hold and face each wave with the same ferocious force. Delta had been summoned. Bakara explained about the force field being a problem for the entire army to break through. There was a nearby facility and generator that had the possibility to overload or hack into the shield's controls. It was well defended, and Clone Officer Vale was currently stationed there with a bunch of clones. Boss was ordered to link up with Vale and see if there was a way into the facility to turn off the shields. Delta left the area and headed through the woods. Combat was all around them, and even though they were eager to help, they had a mission to attend to. Rex's 501st had reached the gap between the center and the right flank where the clones had lost. The Umbarans were regrouping in order to either attack left or right. It was a perfect opportunity for Rex's superior 501st to showcase their capabilities. In the frenzy, they lost a handful of soldiers, but most were able to dodge out of the way and keep the pressure on the surprised enemy. Though the 501st were not able to completely wipe out the group of Umbarans, they were aggressive enough to push them back into a retreat. Delta arrived at the facility site where Vale and his men were holed up. Boss tried to inform the officer while the troops were under enemy infantry fire, preventing them from heading further. Vale said that the defense was too thick for the whole group to assault, but a small group like Delta might be able to get through undetected. Vale said that he and his men would cover them while they tried to slip through. Boss appreciated the effort, and told his men to get ready. On Vale's order, all his men started to open fire at the same time to create more chaos. In this utter chaos, the 4 commandos ran through the field quickly without being seen. In response to the clones' increased threat, the Umbarans struck back hard. Though their front troops took one hell of a beating, the rear guard soon reinforced, managing to even push the clones belonging to Vale back a bit. Delta managed to get through undetected, but it was paid with the price of many lives. Rex and his men had finally reached the troopers at the right flank who were slowly falling back. They cheered as they saw the blue and white troopers appear from the darkness. Rex informed some of the troops to call for a full retreat to the previous defensive line in order to establish a new front at the right side. As the clones would get their able troops and wounded out of there, Rex and his 501st would cover the retreat. Rex also ordered all still operating vehicles to help keep the Umbarans at bay. With the help of their armor, the clones managed to take out incoming Umbaran tanks. The 501st used the trees as cover and pushed on even more to break the front of the attacking Umbarans. They would soon be coming back with more troops, but for now their attack had been staggered. The 501st would fall back as well to secure the line, and Rex called it in that their objective had been secured. At the same time, Delta was trying hard to breach through the Umbaran defenses in the facility. The insides were a maze, and Boss ordered Fixer to locate the main control room once they dealt with a few Umbarans stationed at the checkpoint. It wasn't hard to find for Fixer, and he learned that the main control room was down another 2 halls and up the stairs. Before reaching the stairs, they spotted some minor resistance again, but in these tight and confined corridors, it was easy for the team to dispose of them. Once Boss and his men were at the door, he ordered Fixer to get to the lock to open it. It would not take Fixer long, and to cover their trail, Boss ordered Scorch to mine the hallway leading up the stairs in case backup would arrive. As Fixer said he was about to be able to breach the door, Boss yelled for his men to ready their arms. Scorch did one final check at their backs and gave them the thumbs up. The door opened quickly, and with loud screams the commandos entered while immediately coming under enemy fire. With grenades and constant barrages, Delta pushed the Umbarans inside back so that they could enter and spread out. The enemies inside were taken off guard, making it easy for the commandos to clear the room. Nevertheless, in the chaos, Fixer got smacked in the helmet by one Umbaran, a sight Seth found all too funny, and one he would remind Fixer of for many times to come for his amusement. Boss told them to cut the chatter, and ordered Fixer in the chair to search for a way to shut out the force field. Fixer was on it, and Boss ordered the others to monitor for possible incoming enemy reinforcements. Those reinforcements were indeed on their way, but Scorch's careful placement of the mines remained undetected, and thus blew up as they were walking over them. It gave Fixer the right amount of time to find the files he needed to shut down the force field. As he did, he gave Boss the heads up to call in to Commander Bly to confirm the deactivation. And indeed, the Umbarans were surprised to find their powerful field surrounding the compound to suddenly stop working. When Bly got the message, he did not hesitate for 1 second. He ordered an all-out assault on the outpost, The second wave had arrived, armed with new walkers and armor. He would have some of his troops move all the way back to surround the compound and strike at it from all sides. The Umbarans needed to start playing defensively, but they had one more trick up their sleeve for the approaching clones. With the Umbaran shield defenses down, their outpost was ripe for the taking. Their forces stationed around it still proved a threat, but Commander Bligh could sense that victory was within his grasp. The broken flank had been fixed, and Rex had successfully returned to base where Bligh had set up for the next step. With the second wave of clones having landed, his army was restocked with men and high morale. The plan was to encircle the outpost to give the Umbarans no breathing space. Bligh realized that what armor they still had, they would use in a protective position to hold out as long as possible. He sent several ATTEs around to attack their position from all sides, but in the meantime, infantry and light armor were supposed to clear out the nearby forest. A forest that was hostile in and of itself to anyone who did not pay attention. There were many clones from the first wave who wanted to get to the front line as well. They felt it was their deserved reward to see this through to the end, and Rex told Bligh he wanted a piece of the action too. But Bligh convinced Rex to be patient, as he would be needed soon for another mission. The battle surrounding the outposts heated up. Small fighters managed to find openings to attack without coming in range of enemy AA. The few Umbarans who were still in the outskirts engaged with the clones, managing to ramp up casualties to those who could not be reinforced quick enough. Some of the clones started to realize victory might not be as easy as anticipated. Umbaran fighters now started to engage with theirs, and though the infantry was vastly outnumbered and cornered, there was a certain aggressiveness to their fighting similar to that of a wounded animal. They had nothing to lose, meaning that their actions were bolder. Nevertheless, Bligh continued to send in more troops and hold until all heavy walkers were in position. At Coruscant, the matter brought to light by Maximilian Verse needed discreet discussing among some of the Jedi Council's highest members. If word were to come out that Jedi and Imperial officials had met, it would mean outrage all around the galaxy. With the CIS plan to start a war to cripple supply lines and reinforcements, all agreed that action needed to be taken. Ki-Adi-Mundi pledged for an attack on Utapau as the recent droid invasion had led the planet to capitulate. Liberating the locals could win their favor in the aid of the war, and a possibility to build more cloning facilities near enemy systems. The others agreed it would indeed be an attack that would be seen as justified by public relations. Kit Fisto did bring to attention that one should not scatter the clone armies too much all over the place. If either the Separatists, Mandalorians, or Imperials managed to pull off a successful attack at one of their existing facilities, the consequences would be grave. Yoda agreed, and said that besides the invasion of Utapau, they should also station more men at defensive positions for their facilities. He handed the task of setting up defenses to Luminara Unduli, and he requested Qui-Gon Jinn and his former student Obi-Wan Kenobi to lead the attacks on Utapau. Once they left, Ki-Adi-Mundi, Mace Windu, and Yoda stayed to discuss another, more sensitive matter. The notion of Plan JS-13 had been uttered more and more over time as an anti-sympathy towards the Imperials rose. Yoda insisted it should never be executed, as the consequences would be felt all over the galaxy. He urged Mace Windu and Mundi to keep an eye and ear out for whenever this topic gets discussed. It will no doubt be brought up again in upcoming Jedi Council meetings, and for now, all three agree that even though using it would be unwise, holding onto it and guarding it safely was better than it landing into the hands of those willing to use it. On the planet of Sullust, something unforeseen to the rebels occurred. Giant egos were not only found in the army of the Empire, but elsewhere all the same. A young prominent rebel by the name of Blau was one of the officers tasked earlier with the assignment to retrieve an Imperial AT-AT with the documents provided by the clones. Many attempts failed, and with the recent success on Scarif, all rebel forces who were tasked with this mission were called to come back to Yavin. But Blau's squad was so close to achieving his goal that Blau's ego got the best of him. The sudden strike on Scarif meant an increase and migration of Imperial units at several bases. Even though some of Blau's men argued to head back, Blau was hard-headed and urged on the attack of the AT-AT stationed at the base. The rebels would think highly of them if they managed to bring even more walkers back to their home base. But with the increased security, the attack was a failure, and Blau lay dead as one of the first to die, leaving behind his men without a proper alternative plan. The Imperials mounted their heavy walkers in order to stomp this petty attempt into the ground, and sent in several TIEs to destroy their frigates and few fighters they possessed. Word of Blau's death had not reached most of the rebels yet, meaning that they still moved forward to press on the attack without a knowledge of the incoming walkers. It did not end well for those who arrived first. The same went for the X-Wings and A-Wings as they started to engage with the Imperial TIE fighters. The stormtroopers pressed on the attack, picking off rebel targets at a rapid pace. The rebel soldiers started to notice something was off. Those fighting in the air had no time to pay attention to what was happening on the ground. Fierce duels among the pilots resulted in wins and losses on both sides. Communications were scrambled. The rebels did not know who was in charge, as Blau's second-in-command was unresponsive as well. Some rebels tried to flee inside the Imperial base to seek cover from the AT-AT. Now and then, one of the fighters flew over to fire at the walker, but its shields were too strong to be damaged by them. The white armor of the stormtroopers made them clearly visible for rebel snipers who held back their position safe from the walkers. The Imperials were nearing the hangar, and it was clear for the rebels that they needed to fall back. Star Destroyers had set up formation to block the rebels from escaping, as more and more rebel fighters were shot down. It started to become clear to the pilots as well that the battle was lost. But with the communications being scrambled by the Imperials, the rebels' right flank was not yet aware of the retreat made by the others. Though they were surprised to see the operational walkers, they pushed on. Instead of posing as easy targets outside, some headed through the halls of the base to either retreat or link up with the others. It was chaos. With their communications broken, it was every man for himself. Now the right flank also realized that retreat was imminent, as they lost many to the deadly blasters of the AT-AT. Those in front of the walkers were like sitting ducks. There was barely any cover hiding one's position from the towering behemoths. The Imperials secured more and more ground as they rooted out the enemy one by one. Though most were unlucky, a few slipped through the deadly attempts of the AT-ATs and disappeared into Sulla's nook and crevices. Further back, the fight between infantry still raged on, as there was a divide amongst the rebels on retreating from the walkers or towards it. Though towards might seem like suicide, they are not mobile enough to quickly turn if one does manage to get past them. But the immense size of the walkers intimidated even the bravest soldiers, leading up to more defeat. Nevertheless, there were a few cunning enough to escape this way. They needed to find an alternate route to their evac, but at least the AT-AT was not their problem anymore. The Imperials felt that victory was close. No one knew what was going on. There were those who chose to fight, and those who chose to flee. Yet they did not know if their evac point was still secure. The stormtroopers got the order to push even harder. They headed into the hallways as well to root out any scared rebels who did not dare to emerge from inside. Blau's arrogance got many good men killed that day. The cornered rebels did manage to hold their position from incoming enemy infantry, but it was only a matter of time before they came into the firing zone of the walkers. A rebel pilot in a T-47 airspeeder did one desperate attempt to take out the walker by crippling its legs, but it was too much collateral damage for them to pull it off. Only a handful of rebels were left, and they desperately ran, but did not get far. The AT-ATs had great oversight, and the few pilots left tried to escape into orbit. Though a small number succeeded, most were destroyed by the TIE fighters. The Imperial troops secured the base. The majority of the work for their walkers was over, as now the enemies remaining needed to be hunted down by infantry. Qui-Gon Jinn and Kenobi's fleet had arrived above Utapau. The Separatists had set up a blockade of deadly dreadnoughts and frigates, but the Republic attacked them from all sides. It was a grand display. Giant explosions and fire lit up the ever-so-dark void of the galaxy, as fighters and bombers danced around each other to silence the other for good. Both sides lost heavy cruisers, and the Republic prepared for another wave of fighters to make way for a bombing run. The fighters already entangled in the battle were agile and difficult to spot. The frigates of both factions had difficulty locking on target, but luckily their shields were strong against their blasters. The CIS fleet positioned at Utapau was massive, but the Republic just needed to create an opening to start sending in troops on the surface. The signal was given to the fighters to commence the attack, and many followed their groups to designated targets. A Venator was heavily damaged, and on the brink of being destroyed. It would be a loss heavily felt by the Republic, and in return, the pilots would need to repay the favor. They received the message that the bombing squadrons were aligned and approaching the main combat zone to which the opening would be created. It was near a separatist space station that had already taken a pounding during the initial attack by the clones. Their fighters aimed for different ships to give the bombers as much room as they needed with the help of their torpedoes and rockets. The Venator that was damaged received the order to retreat and save what could be saved. For many inside, it would be their tomb. The bombers signaled that they began their attack run on the droids' control ships as they dove down in preparation. This was it. The fighters were told to keep enemies off the backs of their bombers. The first volley damaged the droid ship immensely, but it was too big to be taken down in one bombing run. The clone pilots would need to make at least one more turn in order to cripple it, let alone take it down. The pressure by the clones could be felt by separatist forces, as some of their bigger ships tried to retreat to link up with the rest of the fleet further out. But the clones were still making losses, as acclimators were burning up as well, as they tried to head into position to pull through to Utapau's surface. It was still total chaos, and another Venator was taking a heavy beating as the droid's control ships focused all its fire on the larger Republic units. The bombers were in position for another bombing run, this time with less units as some got hunted down by enemy fighters. They still managed to damage the ship's right side with a powerful volley, and it was clear that it would not take much to take it out now. During this second run, more bombers were lost. Fire was erupting from the control ship, and alarms rang as escape pods and smaller transports evacuated from within. The ships surrounding the control unit tried to retreat, but the Republic did not give them any chance or opening. And then finally, the huge ship was torn into 1,000 pieces, creating the desired opening within their fleet to send in the first troops to liberate Utapau. The space battle had not yet been won, but at least the Republic could secure this position and set up defenses for an enemy counterattack. Their shields were no match for the advancing enemy. The clones had finally landed on Utapau, and while their fleet was still battling against the enemy, the first of the troops set out to free the locals. Qui-Gon Jinn led this attack as Obi-Wan would join the second incoming wave. The Pauans built their cities inside the planet's craters, as they preferred the dark, and so they would have to battle layer for layer downward to liberate the area. First, the outer and upper rings needed to be secured. The round shape of the cities and layers gave the droids an advantage, as they could easily encircle the enemy. But their issue was that with the opening created by the clones above the planet's surface, they were cut off from reinforcements. Battles would be chaotic. With walkers in armor rolling down in narrow areas, the infantry need to be careful not to be slain by default of cluttering up too much. Thin bridges connected the opposite sides and were deadly falling traps for those not paying attention. On all sides, the clones attacked and advanced in the hopes to link up and force the droids from this position. The CIS had all sorts of units positioned up top, including heavy armor, spider droids, and super battle droids. The Republic answered with deploying a few ATTEs that had incredible trouble maneuvering through the area, but served well as powerful turrets suppressing and destroying the enemy's more powerful units. The clones used their own armor as cover when it was not provided by the environment in some places. It was important to seize and secure the upper control post, as they would give access to entrances towards the lower levels and freeing some of the held locals. But of course this area was well defended, and not enough armies had linked up yet to prove a powerful attacking force. Qui-Gon ordered the clones to wait to proceed up the stairs until more clones had assembled near that area. Both factions had skirmishes all over the place, and both had minor victories and losses. The front shifted in the favor of the clones, but only little by little. With the increasing number of armor deployed by the clones, Many of the CIS spider droids got crushed or destroyed rapidly. Many of the droids stuck to the walls as the clones spread out and secured each sector. The layers and rings on Utapau were treacherous mazes with many passages, hallways, and alcoves being parallel to each other.
We've got movement. Got enemy forces inbound. We've got company, General. Another one down. I have to take cover of this position.
Several squads of clones had linked up across the upper ring, and were heading left and right to reinforce their troops at certain pockets where enemies were still holding out. In this chaos, there were some droids who were overlooked by the clones, and for a brief moment, clones and clankers ran hastily amongst one another in a moment of confusion as the pile of bodies and wrecks increased each minute. Enough clones had assembled near the entrance towards the control post to get green light on advancing. But shortly after, they came to a halt at a large staircase that would lead to where they needed to go. The narrow space proved the clones' superior numbers obsolete, as the droids had spread out all across the stairs to create a deadly barrier. The clones chipped away at their numbers, but lost many of their own in the process. But the clones' dedication was unscathed, as more and more troops headed in to reinforce and drive the droids further up. In the meantime, the Republic was further gaining territory across the outer ring, their smaller walkers leading on their large group of soldiers. In some areas, the Separatists had more elite units stationed, like Magna Guards and Commando droids. Accompanied by powerful super battle droids, these areas proved difficult to take. The front of the clones' advancing army was constantly bombarded with wrist rockets and blaster fire, but for every fallen trooper, 3 more took his place in reinforcements, as the second wave had successfully landed. The clones at the staircase towards the control post had finally managed to drive the droids further back so they could advance. But at the top, they were confronted with a new problem, as there was no cover and the enemy could focus all its fire on the staircase area and shoot whoever showed his face freely. The first to reach the top got wiped out instantly, and the clones found themselves pinned down despite their numbers. But one of the officers saw a weakness in the droids' attempt, as they were in range of the cannons of their fleet up above. An airstrike was called in that blew the unsuspecting droids to pieces. All that was left from the control center was a narrow passage where more elite droids had stacked up their defenses. The clones were without cover and easy targets, but brute strength and overwhelming numbers would have to achieve victory here. The center had to be taken at all costs, and Qui-Gon kept sending in more troops. Like a swarm, the clones kept on pushing and pushing, and won ground 1 inch at a time. The wounded were dragged to the chamber parallel to the passage as the soldiers who were still capable of fighting prepared for taking the center.
You're not gonna like the outcome.
But here, they found the exact same problem with the staircase as before. The droids had a perfect angle to shoot at any enemy who arrived at the top of the stairs.
I have to take cover.
To make matters worse, they even had destroyer droids which were able to shoot non-stop. The clones tried to spread out, but many were shot in the utter chaos. The same tactic as before could not be used, as an airstrike on the center would be disastrous. The clones were pinned once again, and instead of focusing on the stronger units, they got the order to take out the weaker ones first to decrease their number. Over time and with much dedication, the clones managed to clear most of the weak units to focus on the super battle droids with their incredibly deadly rockets. Its thick armor withstood a lot of punishment dealt out by the clones, but eventually it gave way, and the clones managed to get a breakthrough as the droids started to lose numbers fast. The center had been taken, but at the stairs remained the apparent cost it took to achieve it. But there was little time to rest, as now the lower layers and parts of the city needed to be liberated. Qui-Gon set up at the control center, and ordered the first of the lower entrances to be opened to give the clones a way into the lower areas. Fighting here was easier, as the roads were not as narrow. It meant there was less cover for the infantry, but at least they could spread out more. Fighting would be done amongst the Pau'ans' own homes, but the clones were ever so vigilant to see these battles through to the end. Qui-Gon managed to free some of the Pau'ans who were imprisoned at the top layer. The highest-ranking local told him that more of his people were taken and held at the lower layers, and he requested to fight alongside the clones with his men. Qui-Gon could see the advantage in morale and support and approved. The clones would provide them with weapons so they could fight alongside them. Obi-Wan was informed that not all entrances to the lower levels could be accessed from here. The droids must have tampered with the security protocols, and they established that 3 more exits and entrances could only be controlled from a small console on a platform on the outer ring at the location still held by the droids. Obi-Wan notified his former master on the situation, and Qui-Gon requested Obi-Wan to head down to the current opened entrance to help out the clones hold the lower levels until more of the entrances were opened. Obi-Wan left, and Qui-Gon called for a specialist clone squad led by a clone officer named Rain. Qui-Gon informed Rain about the platform with the console on it. It was a small platform that could only fit a handful of men. He requested Rain to bring his engineers and hacking specialists to bypass the droid security to give access to the lower levels. He ordered Rain and his men to fight alongside the next wave of troops hitting the outer ring, but to divert from the main group during the fight to sneak past the main droid forces and gain access to the platform. As the clones were in the process of migrating their heavy walkers down to the lower passages, the Pau'ans started their fight alongside the clones on the upper level to clear it once and for all from the remaining separatist units. Rain and his men fought alongside as well. The remaining droid units were not very difficult to deal with. Many of them were standard models, excluding a few destroyer droids and dwarf spider droids.
I'm taking too much fire. I have to take cover. I'm getting shot here.
But enough ground had already been taken to secure a victory for the clones and locals, as they rid themselves of their enemy one at a time. Meanwhile, Obi-Wan had taken over the lead in charging down the lower environments as the clones were starting to push the droids back. Bridges and walkways connected the lower levels as well, providing shortcuts for troopers and walkers. The droids sent in more troops from the inner circle as the first of the Republic's heavy walkers headed in to pulverize its enemies. The wide space was perfect for this armored tyrant, as the top gunner had great overview. It was even wide enough to have several small walkers and even armor, like the TX-130, rolling beside it. Rain and a detachment of clones had broken off from the main force to head towards the platform mentioned by Qui-Gon. Their route was longer, but not as well protected.
Enemy contact! We've got incoming. Enemy contact! Enemy forces inbound.
However, their smaller number did mean that the droids proved more of a challenge. Rain lost multiple men in these skirmishes to reach the platform, including 2 of his engineers.
We've got clankers.
There were still others who remained as the clones eventually were able to push ahead. They were almost at the platform, there were no droids in sight. But this was a trap set up by the Separatists, as 4 destroyer droids were waiting to ambush their prey as they came closer. Once Rain and his remaining men passed them, the destroyers revealed themselves, activated their shields, and pointed their guns upward. For a moment, Rain thought it was all over in a flash, but to the clones' confusion, for the next seconds, nothing happened. The destroyer droids just stood there, guns pointed at their target, but not moving. Lethato, one of Rain's captains, asked what was going on. Rain was as perplexed as his men. One of his engineers said it must have been a malfunction. But a malfunction on all 4 destroyers was weird indeed. When asked if the clones should destroy the droidicas, Rain answered that they shouldn't bother. It didn't seem there would be any threat, and with their shields still up, it would only cost time and effort that they could use to reach the platform. The clones left, as the destroyers still stood there, motionless. Once they reached the platform, Rain got his best hacking specialist, Silo, on the job to bypass and open the locked entrances. Their attempt did not go unnoticed, as Lethato informed Rain that enemy droids were approaching. Rain urged not to open fire, as they needed more time to bypass, and fighting on the small platform would be suicide. One of the other clones joked that maybe these would malfunction too. The clones at the front said they would surrender as the droids pointed their weapons towards them. Silo only needed another minute, and Rain whispered to stall the droids. The droid officer informed the clones that if they would not comply immediately, they would be executed. They got the order to hand over their weapons. The clones won some time by slowly handing over less important items like smoke grenades and secondary ammunition. Then suddenly shots were fired from behind the droids. The clankers seemed completely unaware to this, and to Rain's surprise, the ones who were doing the shooting were fellow Separatist droids. As the last of the enemy battle droids fell to the ground, the clones on the platform watched with open mouth and amazement. "Could someone explain to me what just happened?" screamed one of the clones. The droids who came to their aid on the bridge all spread out and set up a guarding position. Then, from within the group of droids, a white figure appeared. It was the clone engineer Rox, who stood before Rain and his men. On Umbara, the clone troopers were on the move. The previously Umbaran-held outpost had turned into Central HQ by Commander Bly. As he had his troops move into position to take on a recently built Imperial armory, he called Rex by his side as he had a special task for him and his 501st. Nearby mines and cave systems held Umbaran supplies and reinforcements. Though not assumed a big threat, they could utilize the locations as a sneaky setup point to prepare a counterattack or flanking attempt. Rex was ordered to divide his team and hit the mines to make sure the surrounding area was secure. As it was very unlikely that the caves would be big enough to hold vehicles, infantry would be enough. Rex swiftly agreed and headed back to his post to prepare his men for the mission. The first group he would send out to one of the caves consisted of Dogma, Hardcase, Tup, Jesse, and Kix. Rex repeated Bly's words and told them just to focus on clearing out the caves. If they spotted any useful supplies, they were ordered to leave them there until it could be retrieved by a relieving party. Expected resistance were more Umbaran infantry with a possibility of Imperial troops as well. Dogma, the most serious of the troopers, took it upon himself to function as squadron leader as they headed out. Rex started to prepare a second group as his men left the base. But they had no idea what was waiting for them when they would arrive at the cave. On Utapau, the battle for the lower levels was still going on, as Rain and his men were able to send down more troops thanks to the rescue attempt by Engineer Rox. But Rain and his men's attitude towards Rox was anything but thankful. Instead of thanking him, Rain asked him what he was doing here. Rox answered that he was sent down here to see if he could reroute the system to open some of the passages leading to the lower platforms. Unfortunately, it was impossible to bypass, and just as Rox called in to report, he claimed he saw Rain and his crew head towards the platform guarded by the destroyer droids. Lethado asked if Rox was also responsible for the malfunctioning droidicas, therefore saving them a second time. Hostility could be felt in the tone of his voice. Even though these clones owed their lives to Rox, they still despised him due to the rumors surrounding him and the fact he turned battle droids into his allies. Rox did not answer directly, but instead was surprised to find out that Rain and the others did not destroy the droidicas back then. That gave Rox an idea, but he said he had no time to explain as he ran away towards the outer ring, leaving Rain, Lethado, and the others stupefied. As he ran away, he shouted that he programmed the battle droids to follow Rain's orders for the journey back to command. But Rain and everyone else agreed that they did not need the help of clankers. They cleared the path towards the platform themselves, meaning that the route back should be safe to travel. Rain approached the droid commander and told him specifically to stay put and don't follow them. The droid replied affirmatively, and Rain left, followed by his men. Above the planet, another battle was raging on. Venators and acclamators headed into position to attack a control center, as the CIS had unleashed the expected counterattack. Even though the attack was expected, the CIS still managed to get a jump on a part of the clone fleet due to communication centers positioned on some of the asteroids. The units that took the first hit of the counterforce suffered casualties, as multiple frigates and ships caught on fire as they got attacked by bombers. Hundreds of starfighters tried their best to keep the enemy off their main ships, but it was total chaos. One of the Venators was destroyed, its crew being torn apart as pieces of wreckage floated through the battlefield. The Vulture droids changed their targets to the smaller acclamators as the clone pilots did their best to counter their losses. The small fighters danced between the larger frigates, utilizing them as cover to lose those stalking them from behind. It proved difficult to get a lock on targets, as they often quickly disappeared underneath or in between larger ships. Another Venator was about to give, and more ships were sent into a defensive position as the fleet got word of having the control point located. The attacking fleet moved through constant enemy fire, as they slowly chipped away at their shields and hull. They were afraid that some of the smaller frigates would not make it in time to do at least some damage to the control point. But now finally the tables were turned, as the CIS had to start fighting defensively. The droids positioned near the Republic station still continued their barrage and succeeded in heavily damaging one side of the station. The clones rerouted most of their shields towards that one side, but it got shot too much and eventually gave way. Larger CIS ships had started to engage it as well, but luckily, at that point, they got word that the CIS control point shields were destroyed as well, and Republic bombers and fighters began their attack run in the narrow opening to destroy the unit from within. They succeeded with some well-aimed torpedoes, and took out the remaining CIS fleet, dominating the space above Utapau. Dooku's plan on unleashing a pirate wars had worked marvelously. Over the past few days, skirmishes and large-scale battles erupted among several supply lines used by various factions, crippling their supply runs and reinforcements. This hopefully would reveal a weak point to attack next, but it was still too early to know. The armies were often led by bounty hunters, Jango and Boba leading the side funded by Dooku and the Separatists. Forces sent by the Hutts and the Zan Consortium were amongst others who fought in these battles as well. The Separate War itself created a war economy for Dooku to build more powerful armies. The battles were often short-lived and chaotic. The men fighting usually used their own equipment, some armed to the teeth, whereas others entered the battle wearing only rags. Cases of friendly fire also often occurred, as the clashing forces did not wear army colors and the participating pirates were not trained marksmen. The equipment that was used was gathered, stolen, and bought on the black market specifically for these incidents. After the battles were over, the landscape was scattered with wreckage, weaponry, and dead pirates. Often, the winners salvaged their defeated enemies' weapons, gear, and still functioning vehicles to aid their own cause. Those who surrendered were often brought to their most forward operating base and were given a choice: either join them or die. A pirate's honor is not very much to speak of, and most of the time their life was worth more than their pride or the price they received from their previously aligned faction. But Django, who did not fight at the front line himself, but pulled the strings from behind the scenes with his son, demanded the enemy officers to be treated differently. The highest ranking ones were to have their heads cut off and sent back towards their commander as a message. Tiber Zan knew all too well what this message was. It was meant as an insult, to enrage the army commander and lure him into a trap by making a move too rash or predictable. Zan knew this pirate wars and the blockades of the supply routes would be disastrous for him in the long run, and thus he had to come up with a different plan. A plan he had already worked out as he called for his trusted companion, Silri. She was to arrange a meeting with General Grievous, as Zan assumed he would be more open to negotiations than Django. He assured Silri that they would give them an offer he could not refuse, and one where Silri's own involvement would be most vital. Back on Umbara, Dogma and his squad had reached the cave's entrance and stumbled upon troopers they did not recognize. They were not sure if they would be hostile or not, but they certainly did not make a friendly impression. Hardcase asked if they should attack first to take advantage of the element of surprise. Then, one of the guards spotted the clones and opened fire, giving the 501st members a reason to fire back. The other guards seemed surprised by the sudden exchange, and some headed inside the cave, as the ones who stayed outside quickly got destroyed. Tup informed the others that he saw more troopers heading deeper into the cave. Dogma gave the order to approach carefully, as they would head in to clear the area out. On Utapau, Rain and his men were heading back as they made their way through piles of bodies and wrecks that were still burning. They had not encountered a single enemy until then, but suddenly their path was blocked by a swarm of battle droids that used one of the open doors to reach the outer ring from one of the lower levels. As the clones opened fire, Rain immediately ordered their retreat as they were no match for the overwhelming number. Before Lotharo had a chance to run, he was hit and fell to the ground. He was dead, and Rain and his remaining engineer Fetch would be too if they did not hurry up and fall back. Luck would have it that the swarm of droids heading to the upper level had been picked up by command, and the nearest squad of clones were sent in to hold them off. They would not be enough to win, but at least they could win some time. One of the clones reached out to Rain and said he was safe and advised him to head back to command the other way around. But Rain saw that the clones were already having trouble holding the line, and he decided to stay, to gradually fall back as a group and take as many clankers down as they could. Rain's decision to stay and fight alongside the clones boosted their morale somewhat, and Fetch was also fighting beside them. Rain ordered the men to move back little by little, but he felt that the droids put way more pressure on them with each passing second. Fetch shouted to Rain that they would not be able to hold much longer, and that their defense would be broken. Rain kept silent. He knew Fetch was right, as the droids had already gained more ground than before. Then suddenly the clones were stunted, as several battle droids passed them and started firing at the other droids. They were the battle droids belonging to Rox. The engineer himself also ran up to fight alongside the clones who looked like they could use his help. He asked Rain why he did not have the droids escort them. Though the helping droids would not have been enough to win the battle, at least they would have given them time enough to retreat back the other way. Fetch remarked that he would rather be eaten by a rancor than depending on the help of droids. Rox answered back that it seemed like they had little choice now. Sadness could be heard in the tremble of his voice. Rain snarked that the battle droids of Rox would not be enough to win this battle anyway, and Rox agreed. "That's why I made some new friends," Rox answered. Before Rain and Fetch could ask what he meant, they saw in the corner of their eyes 4 destroyer droids head through the clones and fire at the battle droids. Are those the 4 droidicas we encountered earlier? Fetch shouted. Are you telling me you reprogrammed droidicas? Are you insane? There was unbelief amongst the clones, but Rox felt proud. First, I just deactivated the droidicas when you encountered them back then, but when you told me that you did not shoot them, it gave me an idea to add the destroyers to our army. The 4 destroyer droids were big enough to block the whole lane, and their shields protected them from any incoming fire. Their rapid shots shredded the enemy as they quickly lost numbers. Rox ordered his droids forward to take most of the damage as his fellow clones could retreat. He urged Rain to head back as he and the droids would hold them off. As Rox headed forward past the droids, Rain started to realize how much he actually owed to the engineer. But suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted as Rox was hit in the chest and fell to the ground screaming. He lay there, but his hand was still twitching. Rox was still alive, but barely hanging on. "We have to leave him," Fetch shouted. "It's too dangerous to get him back. Besides, he's a danger for the entire clone army with his droids." But Rain's despise for Rox had been melted away and replaced by guilt and a sense of gratitude towards the engineer. He owed Rox his life 3 times now, and he never asked anything back in return. He was a soldier that the Republic could be proud of, and one who would not be left behind. Without answering Fetch, Rain passed him and ran out in the open. Fetch watched him with an open mouth as Rain dodged incoming blaster fire as he picked up the wounded clone. "Cover me!" Rain screamed as he slowly walked back towards the clones with Rox on his back. The droids made way for Rain and Rox as they managed to both get out alive. Rain put Rox down and requested an escort as they started to head to command. The battle had sundered down. The 4 powerful droidicas had done so much damage to the battle droids that the ground was filled to the brink with droid parts. Some of the regular battle droids belonging to Rox stayed behind to cover the retreating clones. Back at command, Rox was immediately taken to the medical bay, where he recovered slowly. When he could receive visitors, he was surprised to see Rain come visit him, as normally, no one cared about him. Rain apologized to Rox, and said his eyes were open to the acts of kindness that Rox attempted to do. He realized that because of his interaction with the droids, Rox's voice often was not heard by the other clones, but Rain promised Rox that from now on, he would listen. He thanked the engineer for saving his life 3 times, and said Rox had earned some rest. He ended his visit by offering Rox a position in his squad when he would recover. Rain realized no other squad leader would want to have Rox on their team, meaning it would be difficult for Rox to make a promotion. He did not say this out loud though. Rox stayed silent. Behind his helmet, tears were flowing down his cheeks, but he refrained from making a sound to hide this. Rain could tell though by his posture. Rox gladly accepted. Rain was pleased and tapped him on the shoulder. He ended his conversation telling Rox that his droids were welcome as well. On Umbara, the members of the 501st headed deeper and deeper into the cave. They encountered more resistance by the mysterious troopers, but the skills of the 501st members were way more superior. The enemy aiming skill were subpar, and their tactics seemed ancient. They were no match for Dogma, Jesse, and the others, as they took out more sectors one by one. At a certain point, Dogma and his men came across a pile of dead Umbarans. The medic Kix investigated the bodies, but frowned upon the discovery these men were not killed by blaster fire, nor melee combat. "Who could have done this?" Hardcase asked, but no one had an answer. The expression on their faces was that of pain. However they died, it must have been in agony. After turning a few more corners, the clones came out at a larger area where they were surprised to find a walker standing. It was an older model. They had never seen it in actual combat. Some of the men only recognized it from their teachings. The walker had not spotted them yet, and the clones argued what to do. They did not possess anti-armor weapons strong enough to deal with this. Top advised to call in Rex, and Dogma agreed. But just as he called in, Hardcase noticed that the cannons on the walker were moving. He yelled to run, and as the clones headed for cover, a barrage of rockets headed their way, creating a sea of fire. The destructive nature of the rockets fired resulted in part of the cave collapsing. Though this meant they were safe from the walker, It also meant that Kashyyyk and Tup were cut off from Dogma and the rest. Dogma shouted if they were still alive, and both answered affirmatively. The stones were too big to move by hand. There was no way they could go back the same way they came. Dogma said he would inform Rex on the situation. Something was not right here, and he would feel safer with reinforcements on the way. Tup informed Dogma on a tunnel entrance on their side. They would go in to check out if there was a way around the collapsed stones to reunite with Dogma and the team. Hardcase told them to be careful out there. Dogma managed to successfully make contact with the captain, and he explained the situation they were in. Rex had just sent in his second team and asked Dogma to describe the men they had encountered at the cave. When he heard the description, Rex held his breath for a while. Though Dogma and the others had no idea who these men were, Rex knew all too well. Rex caught Dogma off and ordered him to find a way out of the cave as fast as they could. He said to try and reach Tup and Kashyyyk to see if they could get out as well, instead of heading deeper into the cave. Rex would prepare a retrieval group to come and rescue them. As Kashyyyk and Tup tried to find their way through the dark caves, Dogma tried to reach them, but something was preventing him from making contact. After a while, the two separated clones stumbled on a large row of statues. They watched in awe at the stone-cloaked figure. "Who do you think that is?" Kashyyyk asked. Tup stayed silent for a while, and answered he had sprawling area in the cave. This was large enough to have multiple AT-ATs stacked on top of each other. But weirdly enough, there was nothing there but void and another feeling. A feeling that was cold and sinister. Without saying a word, both clones headed deeper into the cave, as their footsteps echoed throughout. Kashyyyk and Tup ventured deeper into the cave and found themselves amongst more of the mysterious troopers they encountered before. It looked like they were guarding the place ahead. Going back was not an option for them. Besides, they had already headed deeper into this than both of them wanted to admit. Tup noticed that there were walkers stationed here too that looked ancient. He noted that it looked like they were used for transport, so chances were high that further into the cave more of these troopers' allies waited. But first, they needed to get rid of these two guards. Kashyyyk and Tup used the darkness as their cover as they snuck around to get a better position behind the guards. Then, with a silent nod to each other, they stood up and knocked both guards out at the same time. The thud of them hitting the troopers echoed throughout the cave, but only silence answered. Their presence was still not compromised. Kashyyyk suggested to continue stealthily and see where the cave would end up. Moments earlier, the Imperial higher-ups Tarkin, Thrawn, and Marillion Tarko were awaiting the arrival of Colonel Maximilian Veers. Veers did not arrive alone. Imperial agent Alexander Callis accompanied him as Veers wanted to discuss their next plan of attack. Veers told Tarkin and the rest that it was Callis who identified that the Pirate Wars was orchestrated by the CIS. This was to hide the parley that occurred between Veers himself and the members of the Jedi Council. Veers was of the opinion that an attack against the CIS forces should follow, now that they had also been weakened at Utapau by the clones. Veers convinced the others that it was Callis who found the location of an old Mandalorian fortress where currently the bounty hunter Aura Singh, who was under the payroll of Jango, was stationed with an army of droids. The fortress was used as a repair station for captured and pillaged equipment before distributing them to other pirates across the galaxy. This meant that armor defense would be minimal, and the potential armor support to some pirate factions could be scrambled. Thrawn was of a different opinion. The weakened state of the clone army by his own plan to melt down the reactor gave them a window to attack one of their cloning facilities to cripple their defenses even more before being able to recover from this loss on Kashyyyk. Tarkin agreed that a sole focus on the CIS would be a mistake, especially now that word had gone out that the rebel fleet was reassembling to counterattack. But Tarkin also agreed that an idea of a fabricated war within the wars already waged should be silenced, and thus Tarkin assigned Veers personally to go and attack the fortress. Thrawn was not amused. He took so many steps to get the Republic to where they are now, but no one was brave enough to spring the trap. Brute and raw violence was not his specialty. He would leave the attack to someone else. After having managed to sneak by a few more guards, Kix and Tup arrived at a dead end in the cave. They climbed silently on the top of a few rocks for cover, and carefully looked down as they were amazed by what they saw. Both clones looked out over a massive group of cloaked men in black, standing in front of a statue resembling the same man they saw before. "What is going on here?" Kix asked, confused. Tup stayed silent. All the men were chanting. The sound they were making made Kix and Tup feel eerie. One member was standing in the middle, right in front of the giant statue. "He must be the leader," Tup whispered. "We should leave," Kix answered, but the two clones had no idea that their presence had been noticed a long time already. The cloaked men grew silent once the screams of Kix and Tup interrupted their chanting. They all turned around. The mysterious man with the white mask had brought the two troopers down and held their bodies pinned to the ground without even touching them. It was clear that this person was using the Force. "Well, what do we have here?" the man on the right said with an entertaining tone in his voice. "Two little spies came prancing in our web." The man in the white mask stood still, not even moving an inch, while the man on the right was switching his gaze from clone to clone. Kix and Tup could not say a word, but both were frightened, sweat dribbling down their foreheads. "We do not have time for this," the man with the white mask said. He still did not move. The other man replied, "Come on, Nihilus. Can't we have a little fun with these two? We got what we came here for." The eyes behind the white mask shifted towards the scarred man. "No, Scion. Keep your mind focused on our goal. Since we acquired the Source Stone, we have to look towards our next step. Get rid of them now." Before the masked man could finish his sentence, he stopped and looked up. He felt something approaching. He felt Rex and his 501st approach the cave to reinforce the troopers. The masked man became slightly more animated. "More are coming. We need to leave." He looked at the scarred man. "Scion," he said, "I will start moving the troops out of here. You get rid of this vermin quickly, and then join us at the ship." "As you wish," the scarred man replied with a sinister grin. In silence, the masked man and the rest of the cloaked members left, until only Kix, Tup, and the man dubbed Scion were left. Tup and Kix could still not move. They were no longer under the influence of the Force by the masked man, but instead were pinned down by the man with the decomposing body. But it felt different. Instead of not being able to move, it hurt. Their minds felt like it was on fire. Their eyes were ready to burst, and their chests were in excruciating pain. The man in front of them closed his eyes. "Yes," he said slowly. "Can you feel that? Can you feel that pain? Can you feel that agony? That is the world I live in. For you see, before you stands the Lord of Pain. I am Darth Scion." Both the clones screamed. The pain was unbearable. "Darth Nihilus, the Lord of Hunger," Scion continued, "requested me to finish you off quickly. But he is not here now, is he?" Scion smiled sadistically, looking down on the two clones and patting them on the cheek in a demeaning manner. "You might wonder what we were doing here, weren't you?" Scion looked around the statues. "I am sure that the greatness of what we are trying to accomplish goes beyond your puny little minds." His voice grew louder. "For centuries we have searched the galaxies for ways to revive the one true Dark Lord of the Sith." Kix and Tup did not catch anything Scion said. The pain was too much. Mortality is what sets you and us apart. For you come into this world, live, then die. A king reigns, then dies. A slave obeys, then dies. But we continue on. Immortality is what puts us at the top of the chain. I am the living existence of this, the embrace and proof of conquering death, as my will and spirit could not be slain as it was held tight by the power of the dark side. Now pain and agony are my existence, but it is what gives me strength. Your pain, your agony, he pointed towards the two clones who were crying and begging him to stop, is what gives me strength. Sion's voice grew quiet again. Of course, a price needed to be paid, and so is needed for our master to return. Sion was holding something small in his hand. It glowed, and when one drew close to it, whispers and screams of outcry could be faintly heard. But unfortunately, you two will not be here to see that glorious day, Sion said as he drew his red lightsaber. A playful tone returned to his voice. Now, who will die first? Is the young and naive man who saved many of his fellow brothers in combat? Oh yes, you are a hero indeed. Many of your allies owe their lives to you for saving them on the battlefield. Or will it be you, the harsh military man who lost so many of his friends in combat, but that loss made him resolute and steadfast? Yes, what a killing machine you have become. Glorious. For a moment, the clones noticed that the pain had stopped. Their breathing was heavy. And then, without warning, Tub felt a screeching pain through his neck and chest. Kashyyyk screamed out to him. Blood was overflowing from Tub's mouth, leaking from under his helmet. Before Tub's body hit the ground, he was already dead. Kashyyyk cried as he desperately tried to move himself closer to his fallen brother. Sion laughed out loud, echoing throughout the cave. Such sadness fills your heart, he said. It is what makes you weak. Look at the man you call brother. Look at the same fate you will have. Accept reality that your birthright is a lie, that your existence is a fleeting dream. Kashyyyk could not see clearly through his helmet as it got blurred by his tears. Kashyyyk had come to terms with what was about to happen next. For a moment, he remembered all his friends in the 501st. He closed his eyes and spoke out loud. Don't worry, brother. I will join you soon. Indeed you will, Sion said as he held up his lightsaber and struck down, tearing the flesh apart from Kashyyyk. A scream was abruptly cut off as Sion ended the clone's life. He fell to the ground next to Tub. It was done. Both clones were dead, and the silence was interrupted by Sion, who bursted out laughing as he looked at his own hand. Even though my body is scarred and rotten, I am still gaining strength. This power I possess will only grow stronger. Then Sion finally left to join Nihilus and the others at the ship, leaving the bodies of Kashyyyk and Tub behind in the cave. Rex and his 501st stood outside at the entrance. Rex did not show it, but he was nervous. He brought a huge arsenal of weapons, infantry, and armor, but he doubted it would be enough. As the masked Darth Nihilus appeared at the entrance, Rex shouted to hold fire. Nihilus approached silently and addressed Rex with a tone only he could hear. Commander, Nihilus said, I can sense that you know who we are. That also means you understand you do not stand a chance against us. I could destroy your walkers just with my mind if I want to. Draw your weapons and yes, some of us will die. But for every one Sith, we kill 100 of yours. Rex stayed silent. He did not want to send his men to the grave for nothing. Commander, Nihilus whispered, we are not here for you. We came to this planet for a different reason, and now that we have what we came here for, we will be on our way. Now, will you let us through, or fight? I'd rather not waste my time on small matters like this. Rex asked what Nihilus had done to his men in the cave. Nihilus sighed slightly. He said that 2 of them got too curious for their own good, that they had been taken care of. But the rest of Rex's men were not touched. Nihilus grew impatient. "Now, Commander," he said, "I will ask one last time. Will you let us go, or do we have to break right through you?" Behind Nihilus, several other Sith had pulled their lightsabers, making threatening poses towards the clones. Rex knew he could not win this. These men could only be defeated by Jedi, and a lot of them. Rather than having his men killed for nothing, he thought it was wiser to inform the Jedi Council on the matter, who undoubtedly had a better idea of what to do. Though some soldiers in the army might look down on it, he knew he had gained his own men's trust and that his decision would be undisputed. Rex gave the signal to let them through, and he promised Nihilus they would meet again, and that next time, things would be different. And so the Sith marched towards their ships, as the clones looked on without interfering. At the same time, Veers and his army had reached the outer walls of the Mandalorian fort that was taken over by the droids. Their presence was noted from afar, as Veers' own AT-AT stuck out like a sore thumb. But the turrets and infantry on the wall were no match for the firepower Veers possessed, as he, the infantry, and the smaller walkers headed forward. Deeper within the walls awaited more droid infantry, but they were easy targets for the towering AT-AT that had a perfect view from above. Rather than a fortress, Veers saw this as a trap that he and his troops were about to shut. The open path towards the fort did mean that there was no cover, and a lot of stormtroopers at the front got killed during the approach. Droid armor and AT infantry took out some of the AT-STs as they drew closer, making them easier to hit. The infantry tried to swarm further in, as they received covering fire by the walkers. The walkers' approach was slow, but its shields were sturdy, withholding everything that the droids threw at it. The droid armor was also no match for the colossal AT-AT, but was very effective against the Imperial infantry. AT troopers were called to the front to get rid of the armor. A few rockets would be enough to destroy them, and hopefully take a few droids with them who were hiding behind them for cover. Veers' men cheered as they saw their colonel enter the outer walls, and realized that soon the fortress would be theirs. Veers always inspired troopers who fought alongside him. The armor and few infantry that were left desperately tried to hold their position and fire at anything Imperial, but they were simply too few. Several AT troopers managed to dodge their way towards the front, and with a well-placed rocket, the first of the droid armor went up in flames. Moments after, the second one followed. The AT-AT would take care of the remaining armor as the stormtroopers hurried inside to secure the outer courtyard. At the second inner wall, more droids and turrets were awaiting them, but once the Imperial had taken the outer walls, they knew it would be a matter of time before claiming the throne room. Those who felt bold already fired on the small targets stationed at the next wall. Reinforcements were on their way to crush the droids inside the fort once and for all. The initial assault was a success. Most of the losses were taken during the first moments of the approach, something that seemed unavoidable due to the open terrain and lack of cover. Veers ordered the outer walls to be taken, and have the men prepare for their next assault to claim the inner areas of the Mandalorian fortress. Somewhere else in the galaxy, the actual Mandalorians had some trouble of their own. A small fleet that was sent out by the main Mandalorian horde to scout their next system to invade came across the evacuating fleet belonging to the Knights of Revan. Malak's ship was one of the first coming under fire, and informed Nihilus and Sion of the small station set up by the Mandalorians. As the fleet had already engaged, warping to light speed was no option. Nihilus sounded agitated. He was glad they could leave Umbara without a lot of trouble, only to find themselves conflicting with the Mandalorians moments later. Nihilus hated the Mandalorians, but kept his voice calm. He knew there were more important things at hand than his own anger. He told the ships to engage and target the station. Once the station was destroyed, most of the Mandalorian ships would scatter. Some of the frontal ships of the Sith took a large beating by the Mandalorians on the initial clash. The larger Mandalorian ships even managed to take multiple frigates out, much to the displeasure of Nihilus, since this would set them back for their next plan. A young Mandalorian commander by the name of Rampage ordered his fleet to target one enemy ship at a time, as this would destroy them quicker than spreading their own firepower. Some of the Mandalorian units headed further out to flank, but this also left them from the safe zone that was the vicinity of the space station. Both factions sent out all fighters, which met one another in the open space amidst chaos and destruction. The Mandalorians and Knights both had excellent pilots, some considered heroes by many. The asteroids provided some cover and optional escape routes to get rid of pursuers. The debris by blown up ships made it more difficult for the pilots to maneuver through. The space station was on full alert. Alarms were going off and members were advised to head to the escape pods to evacuate. Another destroyer came under heavy fire from the Mandalorians. It was Sion's ship, who got too eager and went directly for the station, allowing his ship to be flanked by the enemy. Fighters came to his aid, but could do nothing about the frigates. Nihilus had noticed Sion's recklessness. It annoyed him, but they could not afford to lose his ship. He ordered his own ship and Malik's to head in to aid Sion at the flank. Rampage seemed surprised by the reinforcing ships changing their course so sudden to aid the targeted destroyer. He ordered immediate evasive action, but the damage had already been done. From all sides the destroyers opened fire and barrages, reducing Rampage's ship to dust. Next, Nihilus ordered the space station to be targeted, and it did not take long before that too was destroyed. As predicted, remaining Mandalorian ships retreated towards the main horde by jumping to light speed. Nihilus ordered to destroy as many as they could before jumping, and multiple frigates were blown up. General Grievous had been summoned by the Zan Consortium and agreed to parley about what they had to offer. Zan explained the situation about the pirate wars being bad for their own economy as shipments were lost, intercepted, or attacked. Grievous did not seem impressed, as this was the exact reason that boosted the war economy provided to the CIS. Zan realized that demanding a cease to the pirate wars was impossible, but he did request that two important trading routes to the Consortium were to be left alone, for Zan and his faction to use freely. Grievous asked how this would be possible. If suddenly these two routes would not have any conflict, word could get out that the pirate wars was artificially fabricated, or worse yet, that deals had been made with particular factions. Zan assured Grievous that he thought about this, and he promised him that set up false flag attacks along these routes would convince the masses that these trading routes were dangerous like anywhere else. The sacrifices that needed to be made to accomplish this would be provided by Zan himself. Grievous seemed amused. But what did Zan have to offer him in return? Zan took a deep breath and answered the location of the main cloning facility of Kamino. Grievous could not believe what he was hearing. Though it was well known that the main cloning facility lay on Kamino, the exact jump speed location to it remained unknown, as it lay hidden deep in the archives of the Republic Library. Grievous was intrigued. How was Zan going to acquire this data from Coruscant? Ever since the bank robbery, security was increased, police forces had expanded, and Fox's defense force had stepped up their might, making it difficult for any larger faction to perform any task on Coruscant. This is where Searly came in. Searly and a handful of defilers would sneak onto Coruscant and head towards the depths of the city. Word has it that a slumbering giant Rancor was trapped by the initial colonists when building Coruscant. At that time they did not possess the firepower to kill it, and so they built a prison around it and kept building the city higher and higher until the beast was forgotten about. The creature supposedly is 5 times bigger than a regular Rancor, and Searly has a certain way with Rancors, which makes her the perfect woman for the job. She will lure the Rancor to the surface so that the upper levels of Coruscant will be under attack by the giant beast. As the police and clone forces will be busy fighting a way to kill the beast, the Defilers will head into the lesser protected library to retrieve the data before the Republic realize that the Rancor is a diversion. The data will then be handed over to Grievous, who then can use it to attack Kamino at his own will. Grievous laughed out loud. The idea seemed reckless, but he loved it. He had nothing to lose, since if Suri and the Defilers were killed, no harm would be done to him. He accepted the deal. Not even infants were spared, like that one case 6 years ago. And often the deaths were not clean. A quick blaster shot would make too much noise. In the Coruscant on the ground, poison and sharp objects were the preferred method. Mulder had seen a lot of cop rookies break under the pressure and horrifying imagery that one is being presented. He knew how the system worked. Justice was often far from these cases. The cops appointed to them usually hoped that the criminal had fled to another district or planet, making it another chief's problem. Mahler was different. Though he was in no way an established heroic figure, in fact, far from it, often feeling unmotivated in the beginning to start a case and instead reaching for the bottle, the thought of some thug getting away with crude murder was something he could not stomach. He would have liked his district to stand out amongst others, as the one district protected by the selfless vigilante, the one detective always catching the bad guys. But this was also far from the truth, as more often than not, the cases led to a dead trail or more dead bodies. 3. 3 times Mulder had to kill someone in self-defense. They were all the suspect in question. He wished it made him feel better to rid the world of someone like that, but it did not. He firmly believed in the justice system, because though the corrupt cops were easily persuaded in Lower Coruscant, the prisons and detention centers were an entirely different story. On the next morning, Mulder received a call. 2 people went missing in his district. Of course, he thought. Russell lost his previous 2 partners both during the investigation of a case, making Russell to prefer working alone. Now that did not mean he was entirely on his own. The call came from his chief assistant Crone. On the way out, Mulder asked for details on the disappearance. It concerned 2 individuals, both male, and they were known as Velos Fletcher and Byron Stamp. They had been missing for 3 days after last been seen at a local bar in the evening. Mulder asked for the addresses of both missing persons and said he himself would take a look at Fletcher's apartment. He ordered Crone to check out Stem's living area and then meet up later to exchange details. Crone confirmed, and Mulder headed towards Fletcher's living area via cab. At the edge of his district, Silry had arrived with her crew of defilers. When she noticed no heavy security, she was surprised and emerged alone from her vessel. The officers at the location were rookies, still wet behind the ears, and did not realize that the person standing before them was well known by certain groups. They demanded Silry to identify herself and tell them the purpose of her visit. She refrained from answering. She could see that these were inexperienced, as they were stammering and undecisive about what to do next. Silry ran out of patience, and with a hand sign, her troops ran out of the ship as well. The 3 policemen were so surprised by this that they could not even speak a word. But it was already too late, as before they came back to their senses, their bodies had already hit the ground. Though the lack of security was done in the favor of Silry's mission, it left her uneasy to know that there might be insiders who were aware of the mission or deal that was made. She altered her plan and ordered her defilers to follow her to a different district not too far from there. Once Mulder arrived at Fletcher's living place, he decided to take a look around. The area seemed ordinary. Nothing particularly strange about it. It was clear it had not been visited during the last 3 days since he had gone missing. Fletcher did not seem rich. It was clear that Fletcher gone missing had nothing to do with his particular wealth or physical property. Mulder soon spotted an old man on the street. He reached out towards the man. It turned out the old man was Fletcher's neighbor. From asking the man questions, it became clear to Mulder that the missing of Fletcher had gone unnoticed by the man. He confirmed with the man that though their relationship was not bad, it did not linger towards anything but greeting each other whenever their paths would cross. But the old man did recall that he saw Fletcher and Stemp leave the apartment on the evening they went missing, and, he followed up, they were accompanied by a Rhodian. Mulder asked the neighbor to describe the Rhodian. Though his physical description was quite vague, what gave it away was the description of the clothing. The Rhodian apparently was wearing a bright green vest with gold accents. Mulder already knew by then that this was the Rhodian Zeke. Zeke was the type of Rhodian who wanted to believe he was a master criminal, but he did not have the guts for it. He probably would be too scared to kill someone if he was given the chance. It was unlikely that he was the reason behind Fletcher gone missing, but nevertheless, Mulder thanked the man and called Crone to tell him the news. Crone had found nothing suspicious as well. At least, they had the clue of Zeke now to go by. He knew the streets that Zeke usually hung out on, so Mulder told Crone to meet him over there. Mulder also issued that Shariah, a female Twi'lek who joined their team just 2 months ago, accompanied them to Zeke as well. Silry had not descended into the depths of Coruscant yet in search of the Rancor. Instead, she wanted to disappear in the crowds by stealing clone uniforms. No one would ask questions if they saw a bunch of clones roam the streets, as the Republic was in control of the whole planet. But the Coruscant Guard would be too high profile, and chances were higher that missing equipment or sightings would be called in. Silri found a small supply point protected by a bunch of regular clones. A perfect opportunity for her defilers. They had to be quick. If a disturbance was reported to the clones' higher-ups, right then and there, Silri's cover would be blown. If they could take them out quick enough, eventually the clones would find out that something was amiss, but by that time, Silri and her men would be long gone. She gave the order, and the defilers opened fire. The clones did not stand around like the police officers did, but were surprised and quickly overwhelmed. A few were shot down immediately, and as another was running for cover to call in help, he was shot too. The final clone panicked and reported in to his superiors, but before he could utter the words, he was shot and killed. Silri could hear the officer at the other end asking questions and confirming that reinforcements were on their way. She realized she was out of time, and ordered the defilers to change quickly as they needed to leave as soon as possible. And thus, Silri headed on over to the nearest entrance to bring her and her newly acquired clone comrades to the depths of Coruscant.
The forest moon of Endor. It was a place of ever-going conflict and small skirmishes between the rebels and the Galactic Empire, mainly due to its rough terrain with dense thick forests. Though intel confirmed that the two main occupied factions were the Rebellion and the Empire, recently, clone activity had increased as well. It was part of the deal promised between the rebels and the Empire, as the rebels would provide and share space for cloning facilities. Its forests were perfect to hide right under their enemies' noses. It was one of the reasons why the rebels, vastly outnumbered here on Endor, had managed to hold out for so long.
And leaving the rest of the troopers confused and in disarray. From both sides, parallel
wrong enemy. Clankers were a joke compared to them, and everyone had heard rumors of the strength and ferociousness of Lord Vader. But he was only one man, and this was an army of those people. He was on his way to Coruscant, and on Coruscant, things were happening behind the curtain. Chief Detective Mulder had promised to meet with his fellow officers Krone and Shariah, a female Twi'lek who joined their team 2 months ago. When the three had met, it did not take them long to find the shifty-looking Rodian amongst the people. When the Rodian Zeke noticed the officers, he looked hesitant. For a moment he wanted to run, but since he had run-ins with Mulder before, he knew that this would not solve anything. Russell calmed the Rodian down by saying that they were not here for him, but just wanted some information on the 2 missing people he had been spotted with. Zeke told Mulder that he had only been recently acquainted with Fletcher and Stamp, and that the 2 had started a potential, very profitable business company near here. A shady business, no doubt, Mulder thought, but Zeke saw it as an opportunity for him to start earning more and work his way up the ladder. Mulder inquired about the bar they had been seen. Zeke confirmed that they went for a drink that evening, but said they left early as Zeke wanted to introduce them to another bar where some more appropriate company could be found. Russell sighed and knew what that meant. Zeke continued that it was here where they parted ways, as the 2 men had set their eyes on a pair of cute Twi'leks. Mulder thanked Zeke, and with Krone and Shariah at his side, they descended into the streets of Coruscant to find this shady establishment. They visited several bars and asked the local bartenders for a place that fitted the description given by Zeke. About an hour later, they had reached the location, and it was exactly what Mulder was expecting. A place for thugs and crooks to hang out and have free reign. A place where girls worked against their will, forced by having fled their district, planet, or for permit reasons. This was the purgatory that the elite never saw. Shariah was well aware of how her people were exploited in these parts of the city. It made her sick, but what made her even more sick were the high-grade bars on the well-established areas where Twi'lek females volunteered to be seen as nothing more than lust objects. Where these girls did not have a choice, they did, and they chose the easy way out, exchanging money for physical pleasure. It did not take long before some rowdy-smelling thug lay his hands on Shariah in an inappropriate place. Without a flinch, as if she was expecting it, she elbowed him in the face as he dropped down with blood spewing from his nose. It grew silent around her. "Anyone else?" she asked, threatening to anyone who had the same intentions. Mulder had walked up to the bar. He knew Shariah could handle herself. He informed about Fletcher and Stamp, and the barman said that indeed he saw 2 guys come in late fitting that description. They ordered a couple of drinks every now and then. He also said he saw them talk briefly to the guy sitting over there. The guy apparently was a soldier, serving as a gun for hire for the moment, as it was forced to flee his planet that was occupied by the Empire. On the forest moon of Endor, something big was happening. The initial rebel ambush, led by Nihilus Zintar, seemed a success, withdrawing the attention of the Empire away Connection to the surface had been established, and once the Imperial station had been taken down, infantry reinforcements could be sent to fight the Empire face to face on the ground. As the second wave came close to firing distance, it became clear that the station had already been quite damaged by the brave pilots of the first wave. But many of them had paid with their lives, as the Empire was still at full strength then, scrambling ships and fighters from the near vicinity to reinforce against the surprise attack. The Imperial TIE fighters were the fastest to respond, but heavier units were needed to counter the larger rebel ships. Bombers could do some damage, but they were scarce on both sides. Hundreds of ships now engaged with the Imperial units, whose morale surely would falter at the sight of the enemy reinforcements. The alarms were ringing throughout the station, as entire sections were blasted into oblivion, sucking helpless Imperial soldiers out into the open. With the second wave having arrived, their fighters prioritized other enemy fighters of the same caliber and turrets still operational on platforms and the station itself. It did not take long for rebel fighter pilots to die during this exchange as well. The Millennium Falcon twirled and soared through all the units with ease, taking out targets left and right. Though the station was heavily damaged, it was still very dangerous to get close to it. The lock-on targeting systems of the operational turrets dealt quickly with any X-Wing daring to get within range. The A-Wings had less trouble getting out of harm's way. As the battle intensified, now the Imperials had sent in a new wave of reinforcements, creating a tug-of-war effect as long as the Imperial station would last. One of the things that worked out in the rebels' favor was that there were no full-blown Imperial Star Destroyers in the area surrounding the station. There were 2 destroyers at surface level, but they were providing reinforcements to the ground troops. All around the space station was chaos, with bombers being outmaneuvered and fighters having to avoid debris and incoming rockets. One particular squad of A-Wings was showing some real spectacular display of courage as they took on several gunships, fighters, and turrets by themselves. The squad would later be labeled as the Wraith Squad, as they were able to do so much damage, but slip through the enemy's fingers every time. Han Solo still lent his strength to the rebel cause as well, and with the Imperial reinforcements arriving, this battle above Endor was far from over. But at least an opening had been created, and from a nearby Nebulan frigate, preparations were made to start sending units to aid the soldiers on the forest moon. At first glance, things seemed calm on Endor, with its lush forests, quiet creeks, and remnants of battles of what once was fading away in memory. Its fauna, being undisturbed by conflict and corruption, soon felt the tremble of war, as now rebel units from other outposts across the forest moon were called in to hold the outpost to wait for reinforcements from the sky. But time was of the essence. Part of the rebel troops were now pinned in a position where the Walker had great oversight on them. They were ordered to head into the forest and fight amongst the trees in the hopes to avoid AT-STs and the heavy Walker. A handful of rebels did the opposite, and realized the AT-AT could not shoot them if they were right under it. Unfortunately, these troops did not possess weapons heavy enough
to take it out from underneath. Battles amongst the trees were brief and chaotic. Once someone got shot, their position was often compromised, and they were killed from an unseen angle. This counted for both rebels and Imperials, as the forest made it easy for them to get lost or distinguish enemies in the bushes. The rivers drew red with the blood of victims from both sides. The AT-AT had crept closer and closer and was now vulnerable due to rebel bombings from above. They were part of the second and third wave of the rebel fleet heading in to help their troops on Endor. But though the AT-AT was showing signs of vulnerability and decay, hardship struck the hearts of the rebels once more as they received word on their comms that another Imperial AT-AT had been sighted.